so it's been said, I am Scott Anderson. So kind of the way I start out my shares is recapping my sobriety date, which is December 27, 2004. So I will, God willing, have 12 years. It's a big number to say. I got sober at 19. So yeah, 12 years of sobriety. And it seems like a really long time. And that's cool because it has gone by very quickly, and I really grew up in AA. I got sober when I was 19. I started I'll start from pretty much the beginning and kind of recap a little bit of some memorable or not so memorable experiences, and then how I got to the rooms and of AA and what my life's now like. So my addiction and kind of my makeup, I don't know if it is if it is because of my surroundings or if it's in me. I'm Native American, I'm Scotch Irish. I always share that just because I find it interesting, because right out of the gates I had a tolerance for alcohol. That was my primary substance of choice. But when I drank, I blacked out instantly. That was always my experience. It was never a little bit. I drank to excess immediately, and I don't know where I learned that or where that came from. But for me, that's just how I drink, and there was no other way. It was just all or nothing, really. And I still to this day don't know moderation. I am definitely an all or nothing type of guy, but I have been able to use that same behavior for positive uses now. So I started drinking and using drugs as well, marijuana. Actually, it was for me, it started with drinking. My father drank to excess, but occasionally had a glass of whiskey in the evening, and I saw that he had a glass of whiskey and then wanted to try the whiskey. So I started drinking. I was probably 12 or 13 when I actually started. And for me, my experience, I just went straight to really dealing drugs a year later, which was kind of crazy. At 13, 14 years old, I started selling drugs. I got caught in high school for selling drugs, so I experienced consequences immediately for my behavior, and it didn't change that path. So first consequence, and I like to share in a consequence and then kind of, weigh, because there were a lot of consequences and my behavior pattern didn't change for a period of time, and I'll get to that. So 13, 14, I think 14 years old. Part of my conditioning before I get into that was growing up, 5th grade, 6th grade, I was an overweight child. I was made fun of a lot. I was bullied a lot. I felt left out. I didn't feel a part of. And part of my introduction to drugs was a crowd of people that accepted me. Really, that's what it was. It was a crowd of people that accepted me. My father as well smoked cigars maybe 30 times a year, so not an everyday smoker, occasional cigar smoker. My friends knew that, or my group of people that accepted me knew that, and they asked me to take the cigars. And for a long period of time, this is actually important, I didn't even smoke the cigars myself. I was taking them just purely to be accepted by them, not to whatever, just to be liked, really. It was just validation is what it was. So I was seeking that validation because I wasn't receiving that from my peers prior to that moment, just that acceptance, really. And I was overweight. I was actually I was the largest kid in my 6th grade class, and I was actually made fun of by my teacher in 6th grade, and that was painful. We actually almost moved out of the area. We had a principal's meeting. It was this whole big deal. And I became very defiant as well at that age. Not so much, this is 6th grade, with drugs and alcohol at that point. It wasn't until 7th grade where drugs and alcohol came into play. But it quickly followed. The behavioral issues started. I started rebelling. I started getting into fights. I just started acting out in defiant ways because I was, I think, treated that way by my peers. And I just was an unhappy child. And I actually have a picture of myself from 7th grade. And it's kind of, I went through a period of time probably five years ago at this point where my emotional sobriety started engaging. Even though I had been sober almost 7 years at that point, I started getting into more of an emotional sobriety. Of course, getting sober young, that I really grew up. I was learning the skills to be an adult as I was also getting sober. So yeah, and in 7th grade is when I started just rebelling. I started, and again, being accepted I went from just being a chameleon. So I went from being involved in a little tagging crew to, some familiar with tagging is, a little tagging crew. I grew up in Newbury Park, so local. Little tagging crew to being introduced to marijuana and then dealing marijuana, and then introduced to other substances along the way. Alcohol was definitely there for me along the way, to stealing, to just immediately misbehaving. The interesting thing about my personality and who I am is at the same time I was in Boy Scouts. I was excelling in Boy Scouts. I made Eagle Scout at I think I was 15 when I made Eagle Scout. So there's this whole dual life. I also looked very innocent, and I used that to my advantage growing up, and was able to get away with a lot because I always had, I was always good with adults. I could look adults in the eye and share what was going on, but be lying. So I started becoming this chameleon, so being accepted, and kind of that became an addiction in itself. Is I wanted to be accepted by everybody. When we call that in AA people pleasing, and I became addicted to that, just constant validation from my peers. I started skateboarding, I started playing football, I was involved in a little gang of some sort, which was hardly a gang, but anyways, that's what we called it. And then started surfing, and just started finding all these little groups of people and then wanting them all to accept me, was what it was, and drugs and alcohol were a part of all of those groups that I chose. There were other groups, I'm sure, that didn't use drugs, but I didn't either see them or had no interest in being involved in it, or it wasn't made clear to me. And anyways, so onto high school. The way my story went, what my story is in high school, I kind of started coming around and being more accepted in general. I started playing football, became more of a person that people looked up to. I remembered my time being bullied in 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, and I was definitely still a kind person. I feel like I've always been a kind person, and I didn't act out in the ways that I saw others, where there's definitely times where friends of mine were bullying or making fun of or making others feel small, that I took a different approach and tried to be a part of more of a solution in that. So that was kind of a first little piece of being in solution. And I really think it was because I was in scouting. It kind of kept me grounded a little bit and not totally go totally off the deep end. But I continued doing scouting, but once I made Eagle Scout, I was done. I didn't contribute back to Eagle Scout. Typically, boys will stay on, and so they'll become a leader in some form or fashion. And I felt like I had done my time. I was involved in football, and it just wasn't a cool thing. That was another point of being made fun of. I also have a speech impediment. So where I stutter, I just get stuck in my words and I stutter. So from a very young age, that was also something that people made fun of. I had to go to speech therapy in kindergarten. I'd be taken out of class and saying, basically in my mind, you're different. You're going to come out of class away from everybody. The teacher would interrupt the class. I would leave the class and I'd go to speech therapy. And I just remember the way that made me feel. I just felt so different. So again, that constant validation, that acceptance of people was important to me because I didn't feel accepted at that time. And let's see. So the speech impediment is, I still have it, which is crazy. I chose a career for 10 years where I spoke to over 30,000 kids a year in fundraising, United School fundraising. So it doesn't really affect my life today. However, it is a memory that I had as a child that formed kind of who I was, but I'm glad I went through that experience. Again, it's just from my story, my experience, it's having an addictive behavior, but also dealing with drugs, alcohol, and then being bullied as well, which is obviously a big issue as well these days, especially. So I made Eagle Scout. I wanted to be a firefighter, and I was actually involved in the fire department, Oxnard Fire Explorers. I was really excelling in a lot of ways, but drugs and alcohol really held me back. I was going to Oxnard College in high school, taking college classes to become a firefighter in the fire technology program. I have a family of firefighters. I was on a really good track. I was excelling in that area, but I was drinking a lot. Drugs and alcohol definitely were holding me back in a lot of ways. It was around, and I had a minor in possession of alcohol in Oxnard fairly young. I think I was 17, and then so that was my first real experience with the law, where there was actual legal written document saying that I broke the law. Besides at school, but it was actually the cops were involved, and they gave me the minor possession of alcohol. And then I had a possession of marijuana charge when I was 18. So 17, so it started kind of happening very quickly at this point. So 17, I had the minor possession of alcohol. 18, I had the possession of marijuana. Then 19, I had a DUI. I blew a .24, totaled my car on a tree, wrapped it around this tree. And my mom is someone who knew that something was going on and really didn't know how to help. She had me involved in therapy. She was dropping me off at AA meetings. She knew that she couldn't do anything, and she tried to get help outside of what her and my father could do. But I was manipulating the therapist, or I would be dropped off at the AA meeting, and I'd leave the meeting. I wouldn't actually go into the meeting, and I'd have her pick me up after. So I was manipulating it. And then at 19, DUI, because over a .2, I had to do 48 hours in jail, which I kind of laughed at that. I thought it was kind of at that time it was a pride thing, and I remember the pain on my mom's face. Now looking back, I didn't realize it then, but the pain that I put my mom through, and just that period of time, I mean, just the torment that I put my parents through was awful. And I continue to make living amends for that. But my mom, all she knew to do was really to not give up. She kept trying. So that's all she knew to do. And she'd write little sayings. She had a whiteboard, and she'd write quotes on it. And then, so 6 months after my DUI, I hit my bottom. I had a lot of what could be called bottoms prior to that, but I hit my bottom. I tried to take my life. It was more of a cry for help. I had a rescue knife, and rescue knife is dull, and I just bruised my chest, but I was in a blackout. I don't recall. It was December 25th, early in the morning, so I consider the 27th my sobriety date, because I was definitely still drunk on the 26th. So it was Christmas, 25th. Yeah, it was Christmas Day night, and going into the morning of the 26th. And I just remember not knowing how to stop and just to cry for help. And my mom at that point basically said, "We can't see you do this to yourself anymore. You can get out of our house." She just, at that point, "You can get out of our house, or you can go to rehab. Here's the rehab. We're going to take you today." And she had this whole plan. And basically what that happened, so this was on the 26th, I said, I don't want to go today. I'll go tomorrow, I promise. And I did. They respected that, and for whatever reason, and I did. I went that following day. So I went to a treatment facility, in-house patient called the Siesta House in Thousand Oaks, and it was a 27-day inpatient, 3-day outpatient program for me. I believe it's back to the way it used to be, but anyways, that place saved my life. The first I think 2 days I really didn't sleep, but there was a counselor there that I connected with, and that counselor would sit up and talk to me at night, and I kind of get emotional because he's no longer with us when I talk about him. He saved my life. He was the first guy that I could actually, I don't know, I met him and I didn't really care if he was sober or not. He was just a cool guy. I related to him on more levels than just sobriety. My perception of sobriety was, it's lame. What am I going to do? I'm 19 years old. How am I going to have fun? All of these, I had no idea. Because all I knew was drinking and bowling, drinking and going to the beach, or smoking weed, going to the beach. I mean, everything involved alcohol or drugs. There wasn't an experience that I didn't have that didn't involve it, so I associated that with fun. So getting sober, he gave me the advice, and this was my first God shot, is what I choose to call it. He gave me the advice to find a temporary sponsor, because something permanent can be kind of scary. He said temporary sponsor. And he said, find someone that has what you want. What do you want in life? What do you want in someone that would basically sponsor you? And explain to me what sponsorship was, because I did not know any of these concepts. And I made this long list of stuff. I just rattled it off to him. And the next morning to raise my hand, he said, or that counselor said to raise your hand at the next meeting and ask for a temporary sponsor. I did. This guy looked over to me and he said, I'm your sponsor. After I put my hand down, I said, okay, met him afterwards. He's still my sponsor today, and it turned out pretty much all the points on my list, I would say 100% of the points on my list, he hit. And the other thing was, after I listed off that list and a sponsor, the counselor gave me a name, and that name happened to be the person that said, I'm your sponsor. So I choose to call that a God shot. However, whatever the situation was, I choose to call that a God shot. So that was my first kind of tingle feeling, like a data boy, you're on the right path. That was kind of cool. So anyways, I got pretty submerged in the program quickly. I knew I wanted sobriety because I did have a lot of dreams and goals for where I wanted to be, and I knew drugs and alcohol wasn't a part of those goals for me. So I worked the steps, first 3 steps in the Siesta House, and then after that, I picked up with my sponsor. I started going to a men's stag meeting every Wednesday night, which I still go to. So almost 12 years later, I still go to that same men's stag meeting on Wednesday nights. And with the DUI, I couldn't drive for a year, so I was forced to reach out for help because I couldn't get to meetings on my own because I didn't drive. So I was forced to reach out, which was really good for me. So a lot of people were able to be of service to me, and I was, one, they were accountable to me, I was also accountable to them. So it got me to a lot of meetings. And I got in, I mean, the young people in AA today, I mean, the sobriety, what it looks like is amazing. When I was getting sober, even though I'm still would consider myself a young person, I'm 31 now, I don't, it wasn't as overflowing and abundant as it is right at this moment. Young people's AA in the Ventura County area, it's pretty amazing. So when I got sober, there was probably, I don't know, maybe 10 young people in the area that I at least that I saw. Again, there was probably more, but the ones that I related with and I hung out, and every Friday night we went to a late meeting and we had a lot of fun. Young people's sobriety for me was a lot of fun, a lot of good memories. The counselor that I met, he ended up taking his own life. We lived together, and he ended up shooting himself with a .357 Magnum in our house. And I was home. However, I was asleep, and I sleep soundly. And we lived with a few other friends, and I'm grateful I didn't have to see him in that way, but one of my other friends came home and did find him and called, and that was it was a tragic experience for us and all the guys that I was living with. I had I think 4 roommates, all sober guys. They all ended up going out over it. I don't know if it was over it, but it broke everyone apart. I myself, during that period of my sobriety, which was my first year, I was going through a dark time. I had gained a lot of weight back. I weighed 245 pounds at that point, and I was just miserable. I wasn't a happy person in sobriety for whatever reason. I had met, I don't know, there's no real, I don't know why, but anyways, I started reaching out. Can you let me know when I'm? Yeah, okay. So I started reaching out at that point and started sponsoring people a little bit before, but really got into sponsorship through the Visions Treatment Center and through Brian. And I started going up there every Sunday sponsoring people. Yeah, you remember? Yeah, a long time ago. Yeah. Anyways, got involved going up to this adolescent treatment center and sponsoring young kids, and it was great because were forced to basically they were there, I just had to show up, and they were there, they're going to be there, they had to call me every day. So as an introduction to sponsorship, it was great, because for me, I needed someone to call me every day. Even though I was sponsoring them, I needed someone to call me. So it gave me the chance to get out of myself, and sponsorship has been a huge part of my life to this day. I have, I have 2 active sponsees that are in some phase of the steps, it's a huge part of my life. And so my story, which is so far, God willing, will continue to be a very positive life and experience with this. But I met actually my wife in AA, and I share that to share that I had asked my sponsor, because they say don't get in a relationship in your first year, and it was my first year. It was her first meeting, and I think you were probably there, Lord. I've been in this relationship, and to my wife, we have a 2-year-old daughter. One thing that I like to share, I share that to also share this, is one thing that we did, and I'll only speak for myself, one thing that I did is I didn't change anything when I met her. When we started dating, I didn't change anything. I had my meetings, I had my phone calls, I had my routine of sobriety. I didn't change that for her. She did the same. She developed her own routine, and she didn't change it for me. Sobriety has to come first, and we're both very well aware of that. And my sponsor says you can have photo finishes, but AA has to come first no matter what, or your sobriety, this lifestyle has to come first no matter what, or you'll lose it. So what my life looks like today, I'm a father. I love being a father, a baby girl who's 2. She's gonna, again, God willing, have 2 sober parents, parents that are very engaged, very present. We say all the time, we're very grateful that we're sober, that we made the choice. My wife was, I think, 20 when she got sober, so she'll have 12 years in May as well. So both, good. She works a better program than I do. She's amazing. I'm grateful for her, and I hope she would say the same about me. am grateful that I had experiences that I had. However, I do know that, there's actually, for me, I feel like there's a root of it, and it's just simply validation. As a child, my parents are amazing. They are supportive, they're loving, they are wonderful human beings that have shown me, a very positive example of how to be married and how to make memories, and really good people. So, it's an interesting, concept, because they always question what do they do wrong, and it's just not, it's not them. It's not them. It was, situations throughout my life, for whatever reason, formed a personality, and maybe I was genetically conditioned to be alcoholic, maybe I wasn't, but whatever it is, it doesn't matter. Thankfully, I got sober when I did, and I just don't see a life with alcohol today, or drugs. It doesn't really faze me. I've been around a lot of opportunities to drink, to use drugs. It just doesn't interest me today. I just don't see it as an option. There's a gentleman at my Wednesday night meeting who says, honestly, what's the upside? Really? To have a glass of wine at dinner for an alcoholic, if you're not going to have a glass of wine, it's just not, there's no upside. So, anyways, I'm grateful that I'm sober. I'm grateful I have the mindset I have. And thank you, Lori, for asking me to come out and speak. I appreciate it.
It's interesting, as you were talking, I get reminded that when Scott went to rehab, when I put our daughter into rehab, we didn't know that the kid that picks up the drink or the marijuana cigarette is going to be twice as likely to get addicted when they do it when they're 15 instead of 21. We didn't even know that. So it's funny, because I say the same thing. I have an Irish grandfather that was an alcoholic, and I never knew it until I got sober. And then I found out he was an alcoholic, but I didn't know him because he was gone before I was born. But anyway, thank you so much for sharing your heart and sharing your story. And, you know, I think more than anything else, the one thing that's hard for us to get the message out to parents is that it can happen to even really good parents. You know, it doesn't happen to families that are necessarily ignoring their kids because they live in a big mansion or in the streets because that don't have a lot of money to, you know, to put food on the table. It happens to everybody and every sector of life and every
I was just thinking, yeah.
and every, you know, it can happen in Oak Park, California, and Camarillo, California, and
Beverly Hills.
Beverly Hills. Beverly Hills?
More so.
More so. Anyway, thank you so much. Does anybody have any questions for Scott? Any of you young people?
I share his story quite well. My son is now 43
43.
and he's been sober since he was 25. And goes to his Wednesday night stag.
He's in the same meeting? Is it
No,
the same?
Beverly Hills.
Oh, it's anonymous. Sorry, you're not supposed to tell.
No, no. And part of it, he's now working up in Malibu in a very fancy place called the Ranch, and he does yoga for all of them and develops what he had because he was an artist, and he couldn't get into art school because he would fall down and couldn't keep it going.
Right.
And now he's got a house, his wife met at AA,
Awesome.
and that was now 14 years ago.
Do you have questions for Scott?
Yeah, how do you keep it going? That's, and you kind of
Sobriety,
answered
yeah.
it. Yeah.
You keep it going.
Keep
You know, it's
doing the same
intentional.
thing.
Yeah. Well, what kept you sober last year doesn't necessarily keep you sober
Right.
this year. However, it's a pretty good place to start. What kept you sober last year won't guarantee that you stay sober, but one of the quotes was my mom that she wrote was, "You keep doing what you're doing, you keep getting what you're getting." And she said, "It's, you know, if you don't like what you're getting, it's time to change." Obviously, very poor grammar, but it's just a funny quote that just, you know, stuck with me. And anyways, so yeah, I mean, what kept me sober last year is not guaranteeing my sobriety, but it will keep
Well,
it pretty good.
His friends and my son he was an ADHD, ADD, and he kept it going because he wanted to be calm.
There are a lot of
That I wanted to
people,
bring up.
ADD and Addiction is a
Right.
book that
Right.
that was written with my name on it. There's definitely people who will drink
Just to
to
calm down.
calm down from the ADD that they never knew they had or went through life without. I just thought that was the natural way to. Did you have a question?
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to thank you, Scott, for being here and for sharing your story with us and everything. And, you know, I thought, and because I know you as well, I know what a healthy human being you are today. And the thing that resonated with me, and I guess one of the messages that I also want to share with the meeting is that, you know, if you think that your kid is acting differently or having problems or something, he probably is, and there is help available. The question that I want to ask you, and the thing that resonated with me, was because you had, which I think are almost diametrically opposed lives, becoming an Eagle Scout so young, and also being involved with the drugs and alcohol, is what do you think, as you look back on it, is there anything that you think that you would have, if you could do it today, that you would do differently as more of a preventive thing than having to go through all of that? I would wish that everybody would have the mindset of a healthy, recovered alcoholic who's gone through the steps, because again, you've incorporated those principles in the 12 steps in your life, and you exemplify that today. But a lot of kids who get involved with drugs and alcohol never make it to that. You know, God forbid they'll die. That time you wrapped your car around the tree, you could have died. Is there anything, as you look back and with the gift of hindsight and see in your thing, that you could suggest would be a preventative way to for either kids themselves to know or for parents to be encouraging for their kids.
Yeah, well, I mean, it actually speaks to what the DARE program I think was trying to be, but wasn't quite. But that's the right age, at least I remember 6th grade. I mean, that literally is the right age to talk to kids about drug awareness. I mean, that is it right then. So for me, I don't know if I could have necessarily changed anything. Maybe I could, but what I think would have, even prior to the drugs and the alcohol coming into my life, was just the being accepted, the bullying. Not that I can blame anything, because I don't blame anything. That definitely affected me in a very negative way and scarred my who I was prior to that. And anyways, that maybe there's more intervention and I don't even know how it would be, but anyways, more intervention from adults at that point, and maybe taking it more seriously at that age even, I think is, and I don't know if I think there is more these days, but still, I mean, I think that is what contributed. So that's what I would change, is that there's more intervention and maybe emotional development of how to even talk about your feelings. I mean, I probably 5 years ago really understood how to talk about my feelings and still developing it, but the act of being vulnerable, and that's now, I mean, that's part of my character, but only since, for 5 years now. Anyways, I think talking about your feelings is important. For girls, and only my experience, definitely for me, I think it would have been valuable. So I think that's what it would have changed, is more places to talk about your feelings in elementary school, So.
Those counselors
Great,
being
thanks.
more available to
Right,
you.
yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, I don't wanna, get into the whole meeting here about this, but yeah, I would think that would be something that maybe you could take a look at as a group or as a community, to make sure that there are, opportunities for kids who are being bullied, who are being whatever, that they can go and have a safe place to talk to, whether, again, it's a teacher or just a neutral person that's set up within that system that they can go and
Yeah,
talk
and I
to.
think neutral is important, because I think sometimes kids, at least I know I would be intimidated or maybe feel different if if it was more. But again, how do you get to, the question I would have is, how do you make that available to, that's what this group is really for, which is good, yeah.
Las Colinas, it's where we need to be, somehow, some way. So I'm so happy Cammie's here. And thanks, everybody. We promised to close at 6:30, so if you have more questions, hang and ask questions. If you've got thoughts on anything